Welcome back to Never Enough Novels. Since it is officially the last day of July, it is time for my monthly reading wrap-up, where I share short and sweet reviews of all of the books that I read this past month. July was a little bit of a slower reading month for me. I only got through 10 books, which is a few less than usual, but I'm going to do quick 1 minute or less reviews of each of these so you guys can determine if they are right for you or not. As always, I'm going to put the links to all of these books down below in the description, so if you find any that you're interested in and you grab them from Amazon or Target, these are affiliate links, so I earn a small commission for any purchases you make through these links. It's a huge help to us small creators, so thank you so much for your support. And make sure you're liking this video or subscribing on YouTube or following along on my podcast so you get all of my latest book recommendations. Let's dive into the books that I read in July, starting with the ones that I finished first this month. My very first book was called Roll for Romance by Lenora Woods, and this is a Dungeons & Dragons inspired romance, which is very niche but right up my alley. It features Sadie, who has recently lost her marketing job in New York City and heads down to Texas for the summer to stay with one of her good friends. While there, her friend convinces her to join his new Dungeons & Dragons group, so she is kind of learning the ropes along with this new crew about how Dungeons & Dragons works, and one of the new people is Noah, who is a local bartender, and Noah and Sadie and their characters in the game start up this flirtation both in the game and in real life, but they're both kind of passing through the area and they have to decide if what they've discovered this summer is actually worth staying for. I loved how this Dungeons & Dragons romance was a little bit unique because it's introducing players to the game, so it's great for people who already know how to play or for those who have no idea what Dungeons & Dragons is all about, because it's very beginner friendly. And also the parts where they're actually playing the game are written as if they're from the perspective of the characters, so it feels like you've got a little bit of a fantasy novel in this contemporary romance. I gave this one 4.5 stars. It was a huge hit for me, and a huge thanks to Dell Romance for sending this my way. Next up is another contemporary romance. It was called Love Among Vines by Madison Score, and Madison is actually the sister of extremely famous romance author Lucy Score, and you can kind of tell they have similar writing vibes, which was really fun to discover. Ultimately, I gave Love Among Vines 3.5 stars, so it was kind of a middle of the road romance for me. It features a woman named Jade who is on a bachelorette trip up in the Finger Lakes in New York, and this wedding has been a bit of a disaster for her because her best friend is getting married to her ex-boyfriend, so she doesn't really want anything to do with the situation but feels like she needs to be there. At one of the wineries, she meets the owner and starts talking to him, and they realize they could set up an arrangement and both help each other out for the next few weeks. Everett agrees to be Jade's date for this upcoming wedding because she desperately needs someone on her side in the situation, and it doesn't hurt to have a super hot guy on her arm and show up at this wedding with him. Meanwhile, Everett needs a fake girlfriend to kind of get his parents off his back for an upcoming event that they have at the winery. So Jade ends up staying in this small town in the Finger Lakes with Everett as she sort of gets to know him and plays his girlfriend for the next couple of weeks to convince everyone in town and his parents that she's actually his girlfriend. She's also been searching for some inspiration to get her artwork back on track, and she actually ends up finding it in this small town and at Everett's winery. So in a classic fake dating scenario, what started as something mutually beneficial ends up turning into a real relationship for them. This book would be great specifically for romance lovers who also love wineries and small towns, since those aspects played a big part in the overall story. The next book is one of my absolute favorite reads of 2025, and that was unexpectedly Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I gave it a full 5 stars, and I listened to this one on audio, which was an excellent way to consume this story. It is a historical romance thriller that's set in the 1980s, and it's about Joan, who is one of NASA's first female astronauts. From the moment that Joan finds out that she's been selected for this program, we follow her story over the next couple of years as she trains to become an astronaut and eventually goes up in space. She also unexpectedly finds love with someone that is forbidden at this time. And we also get a glimpse into Joan's relationship with her niece and her sister, who's quite the flaky mom. So Joan and her niece have this really close relationship that develops even more over time. However, the actual story is taking place on one specific day later in their careers when Joan is Capcom for NASA. So she's the only person on Earth who's able to communicate with the astronauts in space. And on this day, a disaster occurs for the astronauts in space. So now Joan and her team at NASA are desperately trying to bring anyone home that they can. This plays out over a course of a couple hours as Joan and the astronauts that are left try to figure out what they can do in the situation. So that part feels like a thriller, but it's mixed in with these moments over the past couple of years that are more of a slow development of Joan and these characters that we come to know and love. Taylor Jenkins Reid does a masterful job with the timing of all this, and this is one of the most emotional books that I've ever read. I do not recommend reading it in public. I was absolutely sobbing at my desk at my office on the day that I finished the book, but it is so heartfelt and incredible and just leaves you with all these great feelings. And it's also just a love letter to space. So I'm a total space nerd, and I loved all of those aspects, hearing about NASA and what it's like for astronauts up there. Out of all of the books that I've recommended this year, this is definitely one of the ones that I think everyone should read. Switching back to a typical contemporary romance, this book kind of got me out of my reading slump in the middle of July, and it was called Made for Each Other by Lynn Painter. Lynn Painter is a go-to author for me, and I have loved almost everything that she's written, and this was no exception. Made for Each Other was a 4.5-star rating for me. So it's kind of a play on the Pretty Woman movie. It features Abby, who is a cleaner, and Declan, who is one of her clients. And when Abby's apartment is getting fumigated, she ends up staying at Declan's apartment for a few nights, assuming that he's not home and he'll never know that she's there. But she wakes up one morning and finds his parents are here at his apartment, and they believe mistakenly that she is Declan's girlfriend. So this sets off a chain of events where Declan and Abby kind of agree to continue this ruse for the weekend. They both get something out of it. So Declan needs someone by his side to make him seem like more of a family man, especially for a promotion that he's gunning for at work, and Abby needs money to help pay off her student loans. I love the relationship between them because they're essentially strangers, and Abby is not afraid to kind of make fun of Declan and his insane wealth. So it feels very relatable as a normal person who's all of a sudden faced with these scenarios that just seem unimaginable and how much money they have to spend. I loved her reactions to all of the different things that he spends money on or what he has in his life. Over the course of the weekend, and then ultimately a little bit longer, Declan and Abby are forced to spend time together and start to get to know each other and realize that although they clashed at first and thought they had nothing in common, there's actually the beginnings of a real relationship there. This was a fake dating trope that was done exceptionally well. It felt really fresh and funny, and I absolutely loved this couple, so I definitely recommend this one. The first thriller that I read this month is called Everyone is Lying to You by Jo Piazza, and this originally caught my eye because it's a sort of influencer thriller and like the dark side of social media. So it features a famous momfluencer who invites her former best friend to come to this like mom conference with her. Her best friend is a journalist now, so she's hoping that she can get featured in her magazine and kind of reconnect with the two of them. But this influencer's husband is found brutally murdered on their farm while she's away at this conference, and then she disappears completely. So this journalist is left kind of picking up the pieces and trying to investigate what really happened. Everyone thinks this influencer mom might have killed her husband, but no one is really sure why. So the story develops as we kind of learn more about her background and then also what's happening in the hours after this event. Concept sounded really interesting, but I ultimately gave this 3 stars because the story was just really slow to develop. It felt like it was a slog to get through all of the background and the interviews and ultimately what actually happened on the day that the husband was murdered was kind of easy to predict and not as shocking as I was hoping. So it felt like the payoff at the end didn't make up for like the slow burn throughout to get there. Next up is a romantasy that is also one of my all-time favorite reads of 2025 so far. It's called Rose in Chains by Julie Soto. This was actually written as a Dramione fanfic by Julie Soto, and she changed the magic system in the world and the character names to turn this into a traditionally published romantasy book. So it's a little bit of a darker romantasy, and it basically takes place in this scenario where evil has won a recent battle and has kind of taken over power in the land. And Bryony is our main character from The Good Guys. So she is being sold at an auction along with her friends and family to the people that are currently in power. In this world, those who are currently in power use heart magic, and their source is from within their own heart, but it can deplete quickly. So they sometimes use familiars or other sources to sustain their magic, including sometimes other people. So Bryony and her friends and family are being purchased in order to be sources for these people who want their magic. At the auction, Bryony is bought by Tevin Hurst, who is a boy that she's known since childhood. They grew up together and went to school together, and they have a pretty negative history, so she's expecting the worst when she goes to his manor. However, Tevin never actually uses her as a heartspring and doesn't take her magic, and she discovers that him and his family might not be who they seem, and there are ways that they are practicing a different type of magic that's currently forbidden to try and fight against the woman in power. So you have that very distinct enemies to lovers vibe going on. You can see characteristics of Draco and Hermione throughout this book. There are also flashbacks over the past couple of years to Draco and Hermione's history as they were in school, and you learn a lot about what Tuvin has done in the past to protect Bryony when she is not expecting or not noticing it. So this definitely has a little bit of darker vibes since she is in a world where, again, evil is in power and she's trying to rally her people as some sort of rebellion. But there is also like the most delicious slow burn tension between these two. She's trying to figure out this new understanding of him, and he is holding himself back from her and trying to prevent giving in to his feelings. I absolutely ate this up and loved every second of it, and I cannot wait for the next book in the series. Also in the fantasy genre, but more specifically the cozy fantasy subgenre, the next book that I read was The Enchanted Greenhouse by Sarah Beth Durst. And she is the writer of The Spell Shop, which is one of my all-time favorite books of 2024. So I had really high hopes going into this one. I gave it 4 stars, so I would say I didn't like it quite as much as The Spell Shop, but it was still a really solid, cozy fantasy. This book follows Turlu Purna, who is the librarian who created Kaz, who is the talking spider plant from the Spell Shop. And we find out what happened to her after she was punished for using magic. She ends up waking up years later in this magical island covered in snow and discovers these enchanted greenhouses that are covering the island. The only other person there is a grumpy gardener, and he's the one who awoke her in hopes that she could help him save these greenhouses. But she's not actually a sorcerer. She only cast that spell the one time. So she's very nervous about using magic again, but she knows something needs to be done to help save these greenhouses. So Turlu and the gardener and a variety of other sentient plants that she meets on this island start to work to figure out how they might be able to save the greenhouses using some of the spells that were left behind by the sorcerer who created them. This book felt a little bit more slow-paced and leisurely than The Spell Shop, and it didn't have quite as many side characters that I loved like The Spell Shop did. So that's the only reason I gave it 4 stars instead of 5. But it's still an excellent cozy fantasy, and especially if you love plants or gardening, then you will absolutely adore this. One of the books I just finished on audio is called The Dungeon Master's Cookbook by Matt Dinniman, and this is the 3rd book in the very famous Dungeon Crawler Carl series. It's a sci-fi, like role-playing type fantasy book. This series follows a human named Carl and his cat Donut, and whatever is left of the human species as they go through this dungeon challenge game and different levels to try and stay alive. Throughout the series so far, they've fought different monsters, leveled up, gained new advantages and accomplishments, and brought new people into their group. So in book 3, they're finally on level 4, and I only gave this book 3.5 stars. It was my least favorite out of all of the books in the series so far, just because the floor that they created for this challenge was extremely complicated. It was like a network of trains and subway systems. And honestly, half the time I was listening to it, I was so confused about what the actual layout of the floor and what they were trying to accomplish was that it took me out of the story, and I just kept getting frustrated with trying to understand what was going on. There were definitely still moments of genius and hilarity and just absolute outrageous adventures, which I love from this series. So I'm excited to continue on still with book 4, but I think the specific layout and plot of this book just wasn't for me. Unexpected hit this month was called Beautiful Things by Emily Rath. This was a historical romance novel that is being republished with beautiful sprayed edges and like this gorgeous deluxe edition. It just recently came out, and I got an advance copy thanks to Hambright PR. So huge thanks to them for sending this my way. I'm so glad I took a chance on it because it was excellent. This is a why choose historical romance, and the author specifically says if you love Bridgerton and that contemporary style of writing but set in a historical world, you will love this one, and she is absolutely right. It features a woman named Rosalie who is unmarried and has no prospects, and she gets an invitation from her late mother's friend, who is a duchess, to come stay at her manor for this like 2-week house party she's having during the summer. Rosalie isn't quite sure what to expect when she gets there or what the duchess wants from her, so So she spends time with the Duchess and also meets 3 different men who are staying there for different reasons, and she is intrigued by them, but she has no interest in getting married and honestly nothing to offer a suitor, but she assumes a little flirtation can't hurt anyone. She eventually realizes that the Duchess has a certain interest in her for a reason and is kind of hoping to take her under her wing. So it gives Rosalie this opportunity to live a life that she never thought was possible for herself, all while doing it on her own and not having to be tied down to a man or get married along the way. However, she's also been spending more time with these 3 different men and sees potential in them in different ways. So her heart is kind of warring between what is happening with these men, sometimes even at the same time, and her potential for a life that she could live unencumbered by marriage. This is a long romance, so it's like 450 pages, but don't let that daunt you because I flew through it. It is also a slow burn and the tension just ratchets up throughout the entire book. But by the end, I was desperate for book 2 and like ready to continue the story immediately. So if you're a Bridgerton fan or love historical romances that have a more contemporary feel, this would be a great option for you. The last book of the month, I literally just finished earlier today. It was called The Locked Ward by Sarah Pekkanen, and this one comes out August 5th, so it'll be available next month. This is a thriller. I gave it 4 stars ultimately. Sarah Pekkanen is one of those authors that I can always rely on for kind of fast-paced, like intriguing domestic thrillers. So this one was no different. It's about a woman named Georgia who wakes up and finds herself in a locked ward in a mental hospital. So she is unable to leave, and she has been accused of killing her sister. She's part of this like wealthy Southern family, and Georgia was adopted into this family while her sister was like the biological daughter of her parents. Georgia knows that she is probably going to be easily convicted and maybe even get the death penalty if she cannot figure out how to prove her innocence. The only person who might be able to help her is her twin sister, who she just recently found out about, but Amanda has no idea that Georgia exists. So she's able to get her to the hospital and start talking with her. And Amanda is slowly trying to figure out if she can trust Georgia or what is going on and why these twins were separated at birth and grew up to live very different lives. But since Georgia's family is so powerful and also really close friends with a current senator who might eventually be running for president, there is a sense of danger here for Amanda and Georgia and anyone else involved in this case, because some secrets are meant to stay hidden. Amanda is left racing against time, trying to figure out what actually happened that led up to this incident with Georgia. And as the reader, we're following along with her as she's trying to untangle the truth. We don't know yet if Georgia can be trusted or what she's telling Amanda is actually true. As Amanda gets closer and closer to uncovering how all of these people are connected and what might have happened to Georgia's sister and who might have done it, she finds herself in very real danger. I read this book in just a couple of days because it definitely did have that fast-paced narrative that kept me turning pages to try and figure out what would ultimately happen. Again, I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't anything terribly revolutionary, but it kept my attention and kept me engaged, so it's a solid thriller for summer. So that wraps up my quick 1 minute or less book reviews of everything that I read in July. Let me know in the comments what your favorite book of the month was. It's always fun to see what everyone else is reading and get recommendations from you guys as well. And stay tuned for my next bookish video.